Welcome everybody to another episode of my podcast, and as always, I'm delighted to have my guest. So if you're listening in the ether, hello. If you're watching, hello, waving onto my YouTube channel. And I know we talked about data before, but that's been through a sales and marketing lens, and I'm genuinely delighted to have Rick Hawkins today, who is a former CDAO, former Chief Data Officer. I'll let him share his story. Just to give, dare I say, a slightly maybe different viewpoint through a different lens, looking at sales and marketing, but from the other side of the table. This will all start to make sense for those that are listening. But and also, this is one of the most organised I've done. So again, Rick, thank you for keeping me honest, and please do keep me honest during what we've been talking about. But as I said, I always start with a Rick, a who, a what, a why, and a when. Over to you. Let's hear your story.
Hi, well, I'm Rick Hawkins. Yes, I am a former Chief Data Officer. I have worked both buy and sell side. I was kind of in data before data became trendy. Started my career in the consulting industry. Spent 25 years doing various small and large consulting. Always doing financial services. Always doing tended to do more the kind of back end risk and finance related stuff. But no matter where I was, some aspects of customer data is always there, some aspect of client data is always there. And I spent the last 5 years as a chief data officer in one of the global banks. So that's short potted history of who and what. Where I'm obviously based in London, and why? Well, why not? It's a great place to be.
Indeed, and we'll put links to profiles, etc. at the end of this for people to, if they want to learn more. And on the risk side of things, I mean, being a salesperson myself, I don't doubt we had a few situations where you look at things and we've sold that. Why have we sold that? Why was that allowed to be sold in that way? Dare I say it?
Well, yeah, I think there's some examples as we get into the conversation that relate to some of that sort of PPI protection, which actually I did some remediation work, and I think I'll say later, but ethics isn't anything that you really have a great degree of hindsight over. So it's a real challenge in the current environment. It really is.
Indeed. So with all that in mind, I thought I'd start with, and this may treat me as a simpleton, and my audience certainly are not, but you said at the top of the show that data's become trendy and everyone's kind of talking about it. And even in my profile, I've got, the future of selling is data, or something to that effect. But in your experience as a bona fide experts in this, on both sides of the table, as you will, I mean, what is data in the round, in a business context, in a more broad context? I mean, what fundamentally are we talking about?
In really simple terms, data is just plain facts and statistics that you gather during the course of any business operation, and obviously it depends on your business. I mean, it can be anything, from number of items manufactured. It could be the time it takes to do something. It could be incurred costs. Obviously, a finance guy that spent a lot of time on incurred costs. And from my risk side, it could of course be losses as well.
Yeah.
But I guess, where we want to get to, I mean, all businesses use data, but I guess the point here is that some use it to a greater or a lesser extent. And I think the really great businesses actually use data to kind of redirect some of their operations, some of their activities. And I think that the superlatives here, and we talk about the FANGs, the Facebook, Amazon, and all the rest of it. But those sorts of industries, those sorts of companies, they manage data much like they manage other physical assets. They curate it, they enhance it, they analyze and they investigate it, and they even put dedicated amount of money into researching it, right? And I think that's the differentiator. It's like people think about data, it's this anomalous thing, it's out there, it's in the cloud, I can't get my fingers on it, I can't touch it, which is very true, but it's just another asset. It's just something that you need to manage like you are managing other aspects of your business.
And I think that's a really, thank you, simple way of describing it. And if we kind of build on that, and I am not a data expert, I'm surrounded by very clever people within my world who are. I mean, I'm in awe of them in terms of how you look at spreadsheets, and I imagine things like in a beautiful mind all comes to life like this in front of you. But if I reflect on some of the articles that I know I shared with you earlier on this, we were talking about in the broad sense and in the sales and marketing sense, back in 2016, 2017, this was being kind of touted as something that organizations need to be doing, need to be thinking about. You mentioned, the mangs rather than the fangs, because obviously Facebook is now Meta. And notwithstanding, what happened in 2016 with Cambridge Analytica and all that kind of side of things, I am wary of maybe referencing those organizations in a more traditional B2B context of the world that I'm in, you have come from, because the audience goes, whoever the leadership might be, go, well, they're them, we're not them. But why do you, does one believe that it's still taking so long to get right in a business world where one argue that we should have learned or can be learning from what the consumer machines are doing in this space?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me skip back and go. 2016 was late. I've been doing some of this since about 99, but then, like I said, I was doing it before it became trendy. But I guess the point I'm making there is that actually it actually takes quite a bit of time to get the foundations in and actually to persuade the business that there is value in what we are doing. So, let me draw a couple of simple comparisons for you. Putting up a building, a number of times, particularly under COVID, you go, oh, wow, that went up fast, right? And you think back, but you remember back and actually you remember them pushing dirt around for 18 months, 2 years. And then all of a sudden, 15 stories appear overnight and inside 3 months, people are moving in, right? My analogy here is that getting those foundations in place takes time. And actually very few organizations, hence my 99 kind of dig earlier, right? Few organizations really put that effort in specifically because either there's no kind of benevolent dictator really driving this from the top, right? Because unless you can join that data together in a consistent manner, you can assimilate it in a way in which you can start to leverage and use, right? And if you just skip that phase, you go, I just want to go straight to the insight and the reporting. All you're going to end up is continuing to operate in silos, right? And you're just going to end up guessing where you are. Why are our sales up? Our profits down? Our manufacturing taking longer? Whatever the scenario is, you just don't know because you haven't joined input and output and come up with some form of correlated answer. And then the point to that, the second really, really painful point, and I was going to draw an analogy with the mobile phone industry on this one, is that standards are hard, right? Life would be so much easier if every phone was just charged with a USB-C cable, right? Objectively, everybody agrees and knows that. But things have evolved over time. All businesses didn't start the same way. Different voltages, sizes, shapes, and the cost for the Apples, the Nokias, and the other outliers out there that are still not using a standard approach, right, is way too high. Why do they want to change it? They have something that's worked, the tooling's in there, they're selling it, it's fine. It will be a disruption to them. It ain't broke, don't fix it. So, and leaving aside, the sort of the lightning cables are better architecture and the whole Betamax versus VHS argument, which is probably an architecture discussion, which we might get to at some other point. But the point here is that sometimes standard adoption doesn't automatically generate an immediate business benefit. And what tends to happen is that you have the myopic businesses, and any business has got multiple subdivisions, structures to it. And they go, yeah, what's in it for me? Well, what am I going to get out of it? And I guess that the wider, my learning on this, the wider benefits here are to think about the wider ramifications of why you would want to do this standardization. What's the holistic reason for doing it? Right now, Apple are being absolutely railed so that for environmental impact because they're different and everybody else isn't, right? And so if I bring a more business context from my world into this, customers, I work for a bank that got into all sorts of trouble with the regulator because it didn't exactly know how many customers it had. And you think, how can you not know, right? But the point is, what's the difference between an active customer and a passive customer, a prospect and an actual genuine customer? Also, we had some certain challenges. We were counting people that were domiciled in the same address. Well, they're not really customers, but in certain cultures and certain countries, that association is considered to be a customer. So you can't, if you haven't got the basic components right, you can't drive your marketing strategy. You can't get that right as well, because you'll end up marketing to the wrong number of people. Yeah.
And I'm not going to go rogue, but we kind of said that, the conversation may go within the realms of that. So I want to pick up on, so my audience is primarily kind of sales leaders and marketing. Yeah. I think you raised a really, really interesting point there, Rick, around, if you need a benevolence dictator to help drive this. Yet there might, picking up on the real estate analogy of building the foundations, you don't see anything for a period of time and then actually start to get some insight. We'll come on to the standardization piece in a minute. In your experience on being on both sides of the coin, as it were, both buy side and sell side, how do you even start to help a business move in that way, or move if you don't have leadership? Because leadership, I'm going to make some huge assumptions here, and most organizations get it, right? They don't need to do something. But how do you move that from a board conversation that, okay, we need to do something, but we don't know what to do, so we're just going to carry on talking about it, to actually then getting the right leadership to recognize they need to do something, but follow-up point, this is going to take time.
Yeah. I guess there's a simple answer that will probably key well with your sales side listeners on this one, which is follow the money. Okay. Right? That with anything in any big transformation, analogies associated with eating the elephant or whatever, you have to look at small quick wins. And what I found in both large organizations and mid-sized organizations, that there will always be some burning problem that is associated with tying up some form of cash, or it's costing you something, right? If you can get that quick win worked out, and if that frees up cash, if it sells something, if it makes something get over the line, and then you have a supporter, and that supporter is then not just someone from the top going, oh, we should do the right thing. It's someone that's going, doing the right thing has saved me money. Then that natural salesperson competition, people go, hey, there's something in it for me. And I guess the standardization thing then starts to come into play, and away you go. The flip side of that, certainly from me, coming from a risk and finance and a financial services perspective, is, of course, there is another customer in this equation, and that's the regulator. And so occasionally, and it's happening across the board everywhere, the regulator turns up with a big stick, right? And so ideally, you want to avoid the big stick from the regulator, whether it's a fine or whether it's an edict to do something. Because if you can actually move the business and have the business moving in that direction with benefits slowly coming through and you gaining momentum, not only does that actually give your business something really valuable to work with, it actually allows you to have a conversation with the regulator going, look, we're doing it, we're on a journey, give us some time.
And so building, and thank you for that clear answer. That's why I get experts on this show, rather than me kind of sort of waffling my way through it. But building on that, I shared with you that blog article that was written back in 2017 around with the tweets from Katrina Neal, who was at Cisco at the time. She's now at Microsoft, with around the lines of any marketer who goes into a data-led business meeting saying, I think, may well be asked to leave, I would suggest you change the job title marketing with any job function. But the other aspect of that article, I'll put the link at the end of the thing somewhere in here, and I can never do the YouTube bit at the end of the podcast as well. Does that mean we need data scientists? Does that mean we actually need data scientists? And to that point, what is a data scientist? Because I guess, I have something in my head of what a data scientist is, but it's been your life since 1999. The Prince song is coming to my head, but it's all the artist formerly known as. So from your perspective, what is a data scientist, and does that mean that organizations should now go hire a bunch of data scientists?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, data scientist is a hugely trendy term right now. I've been in data, since the days of BI, which was with business intelligence. That's not the next thing after AI. What I would actually say about data scientists is that a good data scientist has a complex and wide range of skills, right? And at one end of the scale, we've got really junior, highly techie people, people that understand, things like Python, things like machine learning and AI routines, and are able to then start throwing tech and CPU cycles at the problem. Mm-hmm. But in reality, data scientists are just inquisitive people with tech skills, and the older, grayer ones like you and I have that other really important ingredient, which is the business acumen, right? Because most of the work that a data scientist will do, whether it's a team of people with someone leading with a hypothesis and then someone else proving it out, is exactly that. You are investigating, you're analyzing the data that you've got to prove or disprove something which is a hypothesis. Machine learning and other powerful tools and those super techie guys are actually sometimes able to do it the other way around, going, I've got no hypothesis at all, I'm just going to look at your data and see what I come up with. But there are some potential downsides to that. And I think we joked and talked about the other week about the whole Nicolas Cage moment. You can have unintended correlations. And for those of you listening that don't know the Nicolas Cage one, it's a correlation between Nicolas Cage movies and deaths by drowning in swimming pools. Clearly absolutely unrelated, but if you look at the data, you could come to that conclusion. And that's why, to bring it back to why do marketeers need data scientists? You need that hybrid of skills. You need to have someone that understands the business, got the acumen, come up with a hypothesis, throw it at the techies, see if you can prove or disprove, and then what they may well come back to you is go, yeah, actually, Alex, you were sort of right, but these 5 things we've also discovered. And that's the yes and that you get out the back of putting data science on top of things like marketing.
And it's interesting that you talk about that they're just inquisitive people with technical skills. Part of trying to get salespeople to be curious. Don't kind of follow the same pattern. Don't follow what everybody else has done. Be curious in terms of your questioning of prospects when you're in that stage. Be prepared to challenge the assumptions. If you can then support that with some clever stuff that you've got inquisitive technical people who've got access to the data and can wrangle it, if you will, I believe that's a really powerful combination to have.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up on that kind of wrangling point, because I think, and we talked about this, the great sales and marketing leads, they talk about working their network, right? But fundamentally, what they're doing in their head is a complex series of correlations between completely unrelated facts to come up with some hypothesis. And to be honest, I mean, I'm in awe of folks that can do that, because that's not naturally what I do, right? But people think, oh yeah, so-and-so, he just moved from there to there, and she's now doing this, and they've got this opportunity, and let's go in and talk to them about this, right? People that can do that naturally are just phenomenal, right? But let's come back to my yes and. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of throwing you an analogy earlier about modern sat navs, right? Yeah. Right. If you don't know where you're going, you're going to punch something into the sat nav and away you go. You've got directions. Great. So kind of for any sales person, those greenfield opportunities, they're going to go out there, gather as much data as they can, because they don't want to go in with the I think. They want to go in with as much I know as possible. Mm-hmm. Recent changes in leadership, what's out to tender, anything like that. Yeah. Right. That's all sort of basic stuff. But what about where you've already got an existing relationship and you know that client, right? Right. I don't need to put the sat nav off to go down to the street. I know where I'm going. Mm-hmm. But what the sat nav is going to tell me is, hey, Rick, there's some roadworks. The road's closed. There's just been an accident, right? Right. So every time you're doing something, you're having an interaction with your client base, you're generating new pieces of information. And when joined with other existing pieces of information, that could start generating insight that you might not know, that your magic head might not be able to pull together. Are there key projects running late? Has a recent vendor fallen in or out of favor? And the other things from my risk world, would be, are they paying their bills promptly? Are they facing a takeover? Is their share price doing something that was a bit unexpected? Has there been some sort of change in corporate governance? And to that ethics point earlier, is this a business that we want to have greater association with, particularly right now, political sensitivities, Russia or otherwise, right? There's any number of things, environmental as well, that you'd actually go, I can sell to this company, this individual, but do I really want to? Is it the right thing to do? And I think, finish this data science point off. I mean, the insight that we can get from the data scientist's point is the sorts of questions that your sales folk are often looking to find out anyway. Who is the sign-off or the authority on this sale? It's great that you're talking to the buyer, but that's often procurement or a project manager. That's probably not the person that's actually going to sign it off, right? But if you were able to get hold of the corporate governance structure and you're able to join that together and do the associations, go, well, A works with B and, you can start to get those sorts of things, or insight over how much is the annual budget's already accounted for. I mean, you're basically being played for pro bono work, or actually is there a real opportunity here? And just by picking up extra pieces of information out there, you can actually start joining that in, and it's going to be a yes and. I know where I'm going, but I've got the sat nav on, and in case something new and exciting pops up, I can react to it, and I can go in with I know this is going on, Alex, rather than I think and I think that's the synergy. That's how wrangling and science can actually add a yes and to that skill, that inherent skill that salespeople have over working the networks.
I'm going to steal that analogy about the sat nav going down your local streets, because and again, as you're talking, thinking about it, and I'm going to tie this back to Sales Navigator just for our audience in a second, around the layering new data and insights onto existing data and insight then may give you more insight. So, for example, when I'm coming home, back around the M25, I'll always turn on Waze, although Waze seems to be chewing a lot of battery power on my iPhone at the moment. To your point, I know the way home, but there are multiple ways home. And if the M25 is getting really horrible around the M3 junction, which it can do you then get off of the A30, or do you get off slightly earlier down the M3 bit to Richmond to come into southwest London? I know all of those routes, but I'm letting the data kind of tell me or guide me, this is the best way to go, because we have new information that you will not be aware of. And this then comes back to the data point around Sales Navigator. So my listeners, Sales Navigator is the premium version of LinkedIn, which gives salespeople access to far more information than you get on normal LinkedIn. I always say, though, the key thing is it's just surfacing that data. You then need to know what is the yes and. What do I now do next based on this new piece of information layered against what we already know about this customer, this client, rather than going, that's nice, and then carrying on into the traffic jam. So
I think I'm going to sort of do a bit of questioning back, but I think there's also some interesting challenges there, because that sort of information that you can pick up either from LinkedIn or from other sources, and let's face it, some of these things, and we'll talk about regulation swinging back and forth, but knowing that it's a certain key buyer's birthday, that's a nice thing to know if you know them personally, and you've known them for a while, and you go, hey, let's go out for a drink for your birthday, I've just bought you a cake, or whatever it would be, right? That's great. But if you're turning up for the first time and you've never met them, and goes, hey, so did you have a good birthday yesterday? That kind of gets into that's a bit creepy. Right? And how did you know that? Right. So I think this is an interesting dynamic that very often the data scientist folk, particularly the super techie folks, go, I can join all of this stuff together and look at all this amazing insight. And that's where you need that business acumen to go, you can, but in this particular case, you probably shouldn't.
Indeed, that's why I don't have my birthday on LinkedIn, for that exact reason. So you don't get randoms wishing you happy birthday. It's like, great, not interested. But you raise a very valid point. It's just because the data's there, don't necessarily use it, which I guess kind of segues naturally onto the next question around, we mentioned Facebook, Meta, and we obviously know where that's been, but they're not, lots of organizations have had data breaches, lots of organizations have been hacked and this and that. So from your most recent world, I guess, what were you starting to see around the view on the data privacy angle, but I still want my client to know me, if that makes sense?
This is a horribly complicated area. I mean,
sorry.
No, I mean, I'll lead with some segues, but I mean, I honestly think that this is actually probably the hottest area of data right now. And I honestly say that, in the shadow that's already been cast by AI and machine learning. I really think this is a hugely, hugely hot area. And it's a hot area for a couple of reasons. Mostly because it's pretty much in the space of ethics. And it's a really difficult subject. I mean, I floated that birthday as a sort of example. And I said at the very, very opening about the whole, payment protection insurance stuff. Banks would never have sold that, if they had any form of ethical hindsight, right? But let's I think there's two parts here, and it is quite complicated. So I think the regulation hasn't really been written well. I think we can see it, and we know that from the way in which GDPR has been implemented and all the freaking clicking that you have to do to get on a website. But I think what is scary is today what good data scientists can do with a few data dumps is genuinely horrifying. That mobile phone of yours is tracking you everywhere you go, everywhere you drive. So it knows, where you go, how often you go, how long you go, how much you spend, even what you were, searching for, right? So that information collected together right now, and it's a very hot topic at the moment. Data brokers that collate this information through trackers, through cookies, and all the rest of it. That information it may well be anonymized. It may well be aggregated, generalized, all the rest of it, but the information is so freely available and easily de-anonymized that I mean, the example I always kind of go, to between this is kind of funny to, oh, it's a bit creepy. The school kid that was using free data to track Elon Musk's private jet. He's like, hey, hashtag, where's Elon? Right, that was kind of fun, right? But very quickly he twisted that to become an algorithm to search for where the oligarch super yachts and jets, right? And again, politically a complex issue, but let's just take a situation where someone was trying to flee from an oppressive regime, right? You've quite quickly gone from a bit of fun into something that could end up in a loss of life. Now, so therefore come back to well, what's the answer and what are we doing about it? I mean, frankly, most of the banks are absolutely petrified. So they're not doing half the things that they could do because they're worried of, given the hindsight that they have got on PPI, they're really worried that they're going to fall down another ethical dilemma in 5 years' time, and they'll have to pay out again. So equally, it's also absolutely impossible to write a regulation that's sort of along the lines of, would your mother let you get away with it? Which is really the sort of regulation we need, to the point of it's great, I know your birthday, I know you really well, but if I didn't know you and I showed up with a cake, it's a bit on the creepy side, right? So I do believe that the GDPR regulation, it has to tweak and change and revise slightly, because if there's no legitimate business reason for you having that data, you shouldn't have it, right? And specifically, if the customer hasn't further consented to the use of that data, then you shouldn't be using it yourself, let alone selling it to a data broker who might well then be, cross-selling you, kiddies booties for the next 6 months because you want to search for nappies, right? And that's the reality of, I think, where we are at the moment. There's a duality. I think the financial services and the FANG, some of the FANGs are trying to protect us from sins in the future and put an environment together that's sensible. Whereas actually, I think, as with any organization, the internet is the wild, wild west, and we've got some pariahs out there with some really nasty tracking that's doing some data gathering because they are just looking at the next way in which they can potentially exploit you. And we have to work out how to stop that and then allow the customers so that we can actually improve the customer experience. Because without cookies, I can't know that you visited my site before. I can't pick up and run forward on options that you've set, going, oh, for the love of God, please don't put that thing up there. I don't want it there. And that's customer experience. And to me, that is legitimate business functionality. And providing we're classifying the data in that context, and we're enhancing, we're adopting GDPR in the way I think it was intended to be done, I think that's what we need to be doing in this space. But like I said, long answer because it's quite a complicated issue, Alex.
And my brother works in the industry that you are referring to in terms of the data, one of the biggest data aggregators in the world. And it's just kind of fascinating hearing him how they're trying to adapt to the new world order of the privacy side of things. And I'm kind of with you. I like the would your mother let you get away with it? Because I mean, I bank with NatWest and I want them to know me, but I also want to make sure that my data isn't then being sold elsewhere and being misused. And I know that my telephone number, I've obviously signed up for something because I'm now getting cold calls from random people trying to sell me stuff. And it's like, well, brilliant. You kind of accept it. I'm of a generation that understands it, but then you do have a whole audience out there that don't, and then fall foul of all of this. Conscious of time, so where are we going to go with this? Let's kind of bring the last two together. So automation and AI, and then the future of this, because I think I know, because I can see it here in black and white, some interesting data, right, in words. You've got some really interesting viewpoints on this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think we've partly covered it with the sat-nav analogy, really, right? I mean, the future, yes, it has to be AI and machine learning, right? The cost of compute is so much infinitesimally smaller now that what we can do through AI and machine learning, thousands, millions of scenarios in the same time that we were running one or two queries. So, it absolutely has to be. However, back to that sat-nav analogy, I think it's a yes and, right? We've all experienced that computer says, no, you can't have this moment, right? Because it isn't aware of a piece of missing data, a fact, something that's not there. But I mean, the risk, the best example I think I've got in this space is the way in which risk models and actuarial models are kind of evolving, right? There's this, certainly in the financial services, like we really want to adopt this stuff because like having thousands of data points to make a decision has to be better than tens or hundreds, right? There are 2 or 3 inherent problems in this. And it comes back to the why. I was like, how do you know this model has made this determination, and is it the right answer? And there's a couple of things that in the industry we were a little worried about, because if you train machine learning and AI with data sets, which is roughly how these things work, if you look historically back at what we've been doing in the past, as a bank, most banks would have lent to white middle-aged men statistically more than anything else, because according to the stats they were more creditworthy, and that's the business, right? So you're basically training these things with biased data, and that's one of the big challenges. So unbiasing the models and making sure that they are fair for now and ethically fair for now and for the future is one of the concerns we have. But it absolutely is going to continue to grow and continue to be, back to that helping you sat nav thing, something that's going to be able to give you a clear decision. And there may be certain scenarios, where the automation will completely take over, where we're looking at lower risk, where we're looking at low impact to customers. I can see those being fully automated, right? You want a quick decision on an overdraft, or a quick decision on something like that, I can see that being fully automated. But the referrals, the exceptions, the guiding hand and the oversight is always going to be there, whether it be through traditional MI and BI reporting, or whether it be through a bit of back testing, or a certain amount of governance and oversight that's then applied on a monthly, quarterly, whatever basis. Those are the things that I can see as kind of the guide rails that will then need to go around it. But to your question, the future, yeah, absolutely has to be machine learning and AI, because the cost of compute has come down so much. Why not run 1,000 scenarios instead of 10? Right.
And why not indeed? And I feel that's a great place to end. Although I have one more question. I know that you are a Formula One fan. Are Ferrari going to run away with it this season?
Good question. From early running form, it feels like it. The data would point to the fact that they are faster. Yes. I actually, to your point about AI and machine learning, I think it's a fascinating example of unintended consequences this year, because the whole porpoising thing, this bouncing up and down as a result of ground effect, it wasn't something that was modeled from the machines that they modeled. and they're trying to work out why. And part of the why is that, it's not a clean environment. You're going over bumps, you're going to get resonant frequency. Tacoma Narrows Bridge, for those of us in engineering, resonant frequency, and away you go. So I think it's fascinating that even with today's data and processing and wind tunnels, they can still make the occasional mistake, which I think answers that previous question, which is, where does the human involvement come in? It comes in the hypothesis, the back testing, and the correction where the model doesn't spot something that wasn't considered to be part of the parameters to be added.
Brilliant answer. Rick, it's been an absolute pleasure. I know that you are on a career break, but if people want to follow you on LinkedIn, is that okay to do?
Yeah, we can put the various details in your link.
Exactly, by somewhere like this. For those listening, we're trying to point at the screen. Rick, genuinely, I've really appreciated your insights and knowledge today. I know my audience will have done as well. For those that are listening, thank you as always. If you want to be on the podcast, you know what to do. If you want to recommend somebody to be on the podcast, you know what to do. But Rick, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries. Thanks, Alex.